I am really, really happy to be moderating and honored to be moderating this panel, really important panel. It is strategies for promoting equity and inclusion in legal workplaces. And I think it's a great segment to follow the conversation that we just heard from between Judge Roberts and Michelle Coleman-Mays. Incredible. They had so many insights and important information as we go down this journey and we delve in. I love the delving in, and that was the point of this whole panel, is to delve in and do a deep dive and cover some of the more the tougher topics. So without further ado, I am going to introduce my esteemed panelists to you. They're a great and powerful group. I want to introduce Rees Acosta. She is the Managing Director at Goodwin, Diversity Inclusion. Thanks so much for being here today, Laura. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And it is my pleasure to also introduce Dr. Darnisa Amante-Jackson. Hi, Darnisa.
Good morning, everyone.
So great to see you here. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Disruptive Equity Education Project. And she continues to do a great work, not only in education, but in the corporate sphere as well. And she, Darnisa, joined us last September too. And we're so happy to have her back. Thank you so much. And also my pleasure to introduce Sue Joun. She is the principal with Diversity at Workplace Consulting Group. So happy to have you here, Sue. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. I can't wait to have this discussion.
I know, me too. I'm so looking forward to it. And last but not least, of course, Rosa Nuñez, welcome. She is the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Foley Hoag. Hi, Rosa.
Hello.
So nice to see you. So thank you all so much for being here. I think we have, like I said, the conversation that just took place between Judge Roberts and Michelle Coleman-Mays presents us with a perfect platform to spring off of. And I think, it was our purpose in putting together this panel to really do a deep dive into what equity, inclusion, and belonging looks like in the workplace, excuse me, and how we can all work toward that. What can we do? And so in that vein, excuse me, in that vein, I really want to start off by going to our two panelists who work in big law firms, Laura and Rosa, and ask them, what are you doing? So first of all, I was struck by so much that took place in the conversation, but I was really struck by Judge Roberts and what she said toward the end about how this is no longer just, a moral imperative, but it actually is strategic, and it needs to be, it's our future, right? And it's our company and organization's future. So in that vein, let's start with Rosa and Laura and talk about what are you focusing on in your organizations and doing internally to change culture and make the workplaces more inclusive. Rosa, why don't we start with you?
Of course. Well, thank you, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for having me and having us here. I am Rosa Nuñez, and I am currently, like Amy mentioned, the Diversity Director, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Foley Hoag. I actually have been at the firm for 18 months. We formally embarked on this journey when I joined. The firm has been always very engaged in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, but for the first time, we're doing it formally. We'll build a Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, a team, and we're moving forward. We launched our strategy. I was tasked with putting together a very aggressive multi-year D&I strategy to create long-term systematic change. And our first year was 2020. I mean, what a year. to launch a D&I strategy. So we quickly needed to shift gears, but we've survived. Our strategy focuses on attracting, retaining, and engaging the best possible talent across the industry. We focused last year pretty much on building a sense of awareness, right? Building that foundation that every firm or every workplace needs to have in order to be welcoming and creating an environment where people feel like they can come and that they belong, right? We started with providing the regular unconscious bias training, making sure that people will, we're going through inclusive leadership sessions, increasing accountability for leaderships by starting to report on matrix, right? Diversity and inclusion matrix, making sure that they have visibility into where we started, where we were, where we are and where we're going. And supporting our affinity groups, making sure that we provided spaces where people could hold courageous conversations about topics that were not traditionally in conversations at law firms, right? We are currently now in our second year of our journey, and we are taking a deep dive into evaluating our policies and practices to ensure that we are a true, equitable, and fair workplace. Now, for example, we currently launched our new diversity, equity, and inclusion billable credit policy, which allows all of our timekeepers at Foley to bill unlimited amount of hours towards diversity, equity, and inclusion and legal recruiting efforts in order to make sure that people understand that we are committed, right? And as much as I am passionate about the work that I do, as much as I know that our managing partners and executive committee are extremely passionate and supported about the work that we're doing, this is not the job of one person. This is not the job of a few people. If we really want systematic, sustainable change, it has to be the work of everyone. So we hope that by providing an opportunity to folks to get credit for the work that they're doing, they continue to get engaged and continue to help us drive our agenda forward and giving credit where credit is due. We also did a lot of work with our compensation module, making sure that we were, again, equitable, fair, and that we minimize any kind of biases and anything that will get away in the way of people from underrepresented backgrounds. So this year, we implemented a lockstep salary for all associates across the firm, including bonuses. And again, this is for us to ensure that we are minimizing biases and creating a level playing field for everyone. And these are just some of the things that we're focusing on, that we're doing. Of course, the new reality, the new COVID world has shifted some of the things that we had in place. But in order to create meaningful and sustainable change, it's not longer it's about party or celebrating or putting out a statement on diversity, equity, and inclusion is not enough. Like, you really need to be looking deeper to really understand where are the areas that you need to change in order to make meaningful change within your firm.
Thanks so much for that, Rosa. Yeah, that's really, I love your the credit issue and the billable hours. I feel like that's really significant, and because that's something that all of us are up against in this world who work in private practice. So that's really good to hear. So Laura, what about you? I saw your comment in the chat during the conversation, and I loved your characterization about how as lawyers, we're really good at armoring up and protecting ourselves from actually like making ourselves vulnerable and putting ourselves in a space where we don't know what the outcome is, and we're likely to be uncomfortable. So I really love that comment. Thanks for that, and really want to hear what you're up to at Goodwin.
Thanks so much, Amy. So again, Laura Acosta, I work at Goodwin. And I have a different journey from Rosa. I joined Goodwin as an employment lawyer, and I actually would love to start a conversation about employment laws today and whether they're really helping or hurting in the DEI space, because I think a lot of us would have something to say about that. But I have been doing DEI work at Goodwin for a while, and I would say that we started our journey very much in the space that Rosa is talking about, that we need not to be, right? So 7-10 years ago, it was all about the events and the activities and the initiatives, as opposed to the strategic approach from the top, led by the organizational leadership around DEI. And so we did that for a long time. And we didn't see the kind of change that we would want to see in the organization. In recent history, we have moved our leadership of our DEI initiatives into firm management. And if I were to suggest to anyone here today who's working on DEI in their organizations, that is just such a critical piece. We've been hearing it for years now, but it is the only way to make any kind of change. Because I think embedded in your question, Amy, is this idea that DEI work is cultural change. And the only way we change culture in organizations is through our leadership teams. So, what does that mean for us? We've set a tone and we've started to really convey to people that everyone owns DEI. So to Rosa's point about this not being the DEI team, I think that's another mistake that we make, is we bring in DEI professionals and then we say, okay, the DEI team has got this, or the DEI professional has got this, but really the work lives in the organization. And so we have to be careful not to rest on our laurels once we've done the work of bringing in the DEI professional, really signal to people that it's ownership throughout. And some of the ways that we've been doing the work of accountability, right? So you set the tone and the expectation that everyone owns this. Now you have to figure out how you're going to assess people against that expectation and hold people accountable, inspire people to create change. One of the things that we did was to move our DEI initiatives, right? So the firm leadership, our management committee heads our DEI initiatives, but then we have DEI initiatives baked into each of our practice groups. So we do still have affinity groups. We have a women's initiative. We have a committee on racial and ethnic diversity, a Black organization on leadership development, a pride group. But the expectation is that the practice groups have responsibility for DEI. And so they have goals that they set. There are dashboards that we have created in order to assess progress over time against our DEI goals. We have recently run an inclusion survey to reflect back, not just some of the lagging indicators that we use around, are people staying or leaving and at what point, what does our productivity data look like? What does our assessment look like? What does our, promotion, data look like? But also, what's the experience? And that's a piece I think that we've all missed for a long time as well, is like, what is the lived experience in the organization? And then getting that feedback back to the practice group level. But frankly, we're trying to go even smaller than that, right? Because we know that people come or go from our organizations based on their experience in a team with an individual leader. And so how do we do a better job of helping leaders understand how they're doing with respect to diversity, equity, inclusion? And so we're looking at, and we have not deployed any of this yet, but we're looking at tools that we can use for leader assessment. We've had a 360 process for a long time, but really doing a better job of embedding DEI concepts into that tool so that leaders have a better sense of whether they're doing well in this space. The other thing I think is critical that we've been doing recently is we've been doing the same thing. So not only holding accountability, setting goals at a practice group level, but also within our professional team departments. So we have a large professional team as a large organization. We have 7 chief officers at the firm. Each of them are setting goals within their own groups, right? Because who's doing the work within the organization of hiring people, of staffing people to projects? And again, this is a large organization, so we have a lot of professional team members who are doing these things. Who's running our assessment processes, who's selecting people for client opportunities, who's creating our marketing collateral, who's selecting our vendors, right? All of those things. So we need our professionals to be just as focused on DEI as we do our lawyers. And so we've asked them to look at 3 things. 1, what is the diversity representation, the makeup of your team? 2, what is the DEI competency of your team? Are your professionals within your team truly competent in diversity, equity, inclusion? And then 3, how is your team contributing to the firm's DEI goals? So again, that concept that everybody's got to own this, every team within the organization. And then lastly, I just wanted to comment on some of the work that I think we've all been doing around anti-racism in the last year. And that's a place where I think we did a lot of soul searching and applying those, principles of humility and vulnerability that I think we all do need to do. We haven't been doing what we need to do around the race conversation. I think there are still people who don't know how to, a lot of people, right, who don't know how to have the conversation. We hadn't, woven intersectionality into all of our diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, and we have been, and really now taking our management committee hand in hand with members of our Black community and interrogating, and I will use the word interrogating, right, every system, how we onboard people, how we, assess people, how we staff people, how we look at client development, all the way through the system. And I think last piece, this proximity piece resonated with me so much. It's the management committee hand in hand with a team of Black lawyers and professionals at every level who are sitting together, so that now you have the proximity, now you have the voice directly in the ear of management of what needs to change. So those are some of the things that I'm excited about, happy to talk more about, but I will not pretend that we are, we're where we need to be. We have a long way to go.
Thanks, Laura, for that. Yeah, that's I love that. I love that word, interrogate. I think that's a great way to approach it and appropriate, given what we're talking about. So let's turn to our consultants, Sue and Darnisa. We're really curious about kind of what strategic work you're doing with your clients. And like we say, we use the phrase transforming your workplace culture a lot. And I think it would be great to sort of delve into that a little bit and actually talk about what that, what you do in connection with that. What is that? What does it look like? So thanks. Darnisa, do you want to go?
Not a problem. I'm accustomed to last name being A, so I often get called to go first. Okay, so Sooty, we've got this. Sujan, we've got this one. I'm all excited to look at Sujan and Sooty at the same time. So I think the first thing for me has really been helping leaders understand what exactly changing workplace culture looks like. I find that so many folks don't really think that culture has value. And I find that there are different entry places to the conversation. So there are some leaders that need to hear what culture does for the bottom line as the way in. And I hate that that's the entry point. And for some of us, people only want culture if they know it's going to have an impact on our return on investment. So that actually is true. Like, the more diverse a team is, the more likely the differences of that team contribute to innovation in new ways. Teams are most likely to actually reach their impact goals and visions in that diversity. This is the power of diversification. However, diversification in absence of actually changing our culture is tokenizing and dangerous. So that's my second recommendation. The first one is leaders actually have to understand the journey that you are asking them to go on, right? So that journey includes being able to have difficult conversations. Productive conflict is a beautiful thing when it is facilitated well. Because in that diversity, people have to be able to say hard things to each other, to talk about and define what we actually need in our culture. And as you start to do that, if people expect to be comfortable, if you don't have norms or values that hold people in integrity with that kind of productive conflict, harm can happen. So that segues into the second big idea, which is really making sure we explain what this journey looks like. Doing workplace change always triggers loss. People do not fear change. They fear loss. And loss doesn't always look like I'm afraid of losing my job. Think about it. Your firms and organizations have hired incredibly competent people. You have hired people who have not had to show up as learners. They've had to show up as expert. And now you were asking them to do new things on a daily basis that they have never had to do before in a culture that may not make time for learning. You hear it? So the loss that a lot of people feel is a loss of expertise. People don't exactly know what you want them to do. And to Laura's point, that last question of, is my team contributing to this firm's ability to reach our DEI vision, to reach our mission? A lot of times teams can't get there because their leadership have never qualified what they actually want them to do differently. So am I having a difficult conversation? To what end? We're talking about anti-racism for what purpose, right? So that's that third. I apologize. Okay, there's blenders happening in here. We are working from home and smoothieing from home. I don't know what kind, that's not me making a smoothie, but it sounds like a good one. So I do apologize for a little bit of this noise. I thought we were going to be good for this section. And then that last one, so if it's actually help leaders understand the value of culture, the second one is just really describe what you want people to do differently. The third one is leadership really has to be able to model the culture that you want. If your leaders don't know how to model doing a difficult conversation, anti-racism is not just work about dismantling oppression. Anti-racism requires that leaders know how to talk about themselves as cultural racial beings. Does your leadership know how to talk about themselves? So for example, if I came in the room and I said, I am a Black cisgendered woman, like that type of introduction in and of itself is very different than how people traditionally introduce themselves. And if leaders don't know how to do that, change really doesn't happen. So those are the big three nuggets again, and I'll say it because Sujan, I want to make space for you and your brilliance as well. So it's really actually making sure that people understand that culture has value. And usually the value is it allows for innovation because in all these different perspectives, people can contribute different things. But if different perspectives are present, we actually have to be careful that we are defining for people what we want them to do with this learning. Because if people don't know what you want them to do, they fear loss, and that loss holds them back from making the change. They want to show up expert to you and they don't know how. And the third one is, if you want a new culture and your leaders are not modeling that culture, it's really impossible for the culture to manifest. On average, it takes a team 10 years to get to equity, 10, right? So also think about funding that change. Sujan, I want to pass it over to you because I know you've got great things to contribute as well. Thanks for that question, Amy.
Thank you. If I nodded my head any further, I would no longer be on screen. So thank you for that. So it's a big yes and from me. So let me add to that. So it's a yes and. It's really about what we're doing now is, if you listen to the previous talk right before this one, if we believe we need systemic change, that means we need systemic change in the organization. And systemic change includes culture, like we just discussed, but also it can't just happen at one person at a time. I mean, what are the statistics? It's going to take 100 years to parity for gender parity. It's going to take 95 years for racial parity. We don't have that. That's not, we don't have time for that. And so really working with organizations to figure out how can we fundamentally rethink talent. Here's what I mean by that. Often in the past, we've always asked, sort of the women attorneys, the female attorneys, or self-identified as female attorneys, attorneys of color, to assimilate until you are at a point where you could be accepted as a partner, accepted as a leader, right? So you're asking one person at a time. What we need to do is completely rethink talent. For us to do the systemic changes, we need to rethink talent. And so when I say things like rethink talent, I mean things like, take a look at your few partners of color. Do they have Western sounding names? Do they have no accents? Have they had to assimilate to the point where they pass as one of us? So here's the thing. When we say we want diverse talent, often what we're meaning is we want someone who walks, talks, do readings, do memos, do emails, and talk just like us, but just in different packages. That's why it's so slow. So when we coach people of difference to be successful, we're often telling them to, change their accents, maybe whitewash their names, maybe change the way you do emails. And we're basically asking someone to completely twist themselves out of shape into a form in order to make them successful. That is not sustainable. And frankly, it is absolutely exhausting. And since this is Women in Law Conference, let me talk about the women portion for a moment. 44% of white women, 52% of Asian women, 53% of Latino, Latina, Latinx women, and 72% of Black African American women feel that they've all been asked to have executive presence, and they all agree that executive presence meaning is to meet the standards of characteristics of a white male. So if we continue to think about talent the same way and we let one extraordinary person of difference in at a time, we're not moving the needle anytime soon. So that's one. Second part is, or the other part I would say is, think about things like, I am an immigrant and I am an Asian female. I can't tell you how many times people said to me, you speak English with no accent, as if that is the biggest compliment anyone can pay me. And what I will ask you is, why is that a compliment? Right, so again, just rethink. We're complimenting people of difference on their ability to assimilate. All right, since you have that concept, the next one I want to just end with is, for you to have systemic change, you have to move the majority. Change does not happen without the majority willing it and wanting it and letting it happen. Who moves the majority in any organization, whether it's a law firm, corporation, or bar associations or nonprofit organizations? Senior leaders. Senior leaders move the majority. We cannot rely on people of difference to, I often say, we often ask the oppressed to prove that they're oppressed and change the oppression using a system that's inequitable. We're not going anywhere anytime soon. The majority has to move, and the only way the majority move is if the senior leaders make it move. I'll stop there.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm blown away by all of this. So this issue of senior leaders, I'm so, Darnisa, in terms of what you said around that so resonated with me. Leaders fear loss, and that loss, I mean, in the legal world, expertise is the thing, right? And so to come in as a learner and not an expert, I mean, that is, I can imagine quite a few leaders who are going to resist and push back on that really, really fiercely. And that seems, so I'm just curious, in terms, and I'm just going to throw this out to the group. What do you think, are there, and I'm going off script. I'm telling everyone I'm going off script, but I really think that it calls for this. What do you think are some things that can be employed to assist, support leaders in this difficult, movement? Because I think that's just critical, right?
And I think the first step, I know I saw Rosa, I saw you come off mute, but I'll say
No, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. I think you've got to meet technical fear of expertise or not having it with a very technical solution, in my opinion, first, right? There are two different types of ways you can do DEI work. A technical way is like a quick fix. It doesn't change the culture, but it gives us a win. It gives us a milestone that makes people feel like things are happening. Adaptive stuff is more about the mindset change. I find that investing time in organizing a senior leadership retreat where senior leaders can be vulnerable in that group, in that affinity first, to actually let them feel the work, right? Leaders can't call people to do anything that they have not done. And if they can't articulate what the journey is going to feel like, no one will go on it. And I find that that first articulation ends up being like a strategic vision, a roadmap, what's possible. So I find that a senior retreat that does work around DEI, racial identity development, and supports us defining what in specificity do we think we can do actually helps move people, because we have now have something to tell people to apply their learning to. Versus when leaders say, we're doing DEI now, and then people say, okay, but when are we doing it? How much is it going to cost? What is it going to look like? Do we have a charge code for that? And if the leaders don't have the answers to that, the staff don't even believe you are okay enough to lead them through something hard. You haven't done it, and they can tell. And they can smell the inauthenticity like summer trash. So I find, that's the Brooklyn in me, all right? You know what summer trash smell like? I find that a strategic roadmap that even has 1 to 2 key outcomes really helps people move because they have the clarity on how to move.
I was just gonna add, I mean, but just so hard to follow Darnisa. She's just mind-blowing. You know, change is, like we mentioned here, change is not easy. And when you're doing diversity, equity, and inclusion work, you're changing mindsets and you're changing hearts and you're changing behaviors. And that's the hardest thing to do. Especially at a firm, for example, my firm that has been established for 75 years, right? They are behaviors that have been embedded into the DNA of the firm for 75 years. You know, you have people that grew up at the firm, and you have very successful rainmaking white senior attorneys that have been making a lot of money, not thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Why do I have to think about diversity now when I am, you know, bringing in millions of dollars into the firm? I really don't. That's a great thing to do, you guys. You do you. I am going to do me and continue to do me, because it has nothing to do with me. You tell me what what do I have to do? Where do I have to show up? Do I have to say, hi to somebody? But it really does not impact who I am and the work that I do. And that's the problem, right? That's part of the problem, because you are going to have those people as you embark on your journey. You are going to have the folks that think that has nothing to do with them. And that's okay. You're going to have to meet people where they are, identify who your supporters are, who are those folks that are going to help you get to where you need to be in your journey, and leverage those relationships as you continue to move the needle forward, because you are going to have the resistance. But the more work that you do and the more help you have, and the more conversations and how people are starting to see the change happening in the organization, more and more folks are going to be coming along. But you are going to have to meet people where they are. Not everyone is at the same level.
Very quickly, Amy, 2 kind of tiny technical approaches, not in the adaptive space, but something we did this last year that was incredibly powerful. A legal assistant designed a session where she had a group of senior leaders at the firm who were answering questions about race without ever seeing the questions before they went into the session. And they had a lot of coaching ahead of time, like they ran through not the questions, but just a lot of conversations about race and sort of like going through that exercise. And then they got up in front of this full room and they answered questions. And so it was just practicing, right? Practicing being vulnerable. Lawyers always have the questions and the answers before they go into a room, right? And we don't have the language that we need for race conversations. And so they were practicing that. One other tiny one that I was introduced to recently, and I'm not usually a big fan of tech in the people space, but if it's, if you don't have, other tools to use, this could be one. There's a group called Mersion that has it's a VR type of tool where you're literally sitting in a room and then people are interacting with you and speaking with you on a real-time basis back and forth. And so you're hearing the microaggression, you're sitting in a room with a group of other people and you're having to respond to that microaggression. And if you're a white person, for example, be an upstander or whatever role you were assigned sort of in that context, it's a pretty powerful tool for kind of, again, like living these moments and starting to embed those skills in our leadership.
Can I add three?
Sue, yeah, go.
Yeah, so again, a big yes and to each of you. So let me just add three more to that list. You're going to have plethora of options to give to your senior leaders. So let me add three more. First is have them be a leader in listening. They don't have to be an expert on this topic to say anything. One of the most powerful things that a leader could demonstrate is listener in chief, maybe is the best way to say it. Have them be active listeners. So it's like, let's talk about diversity and inclusion, and I would like to listen. Tell me more. You don't have to have the answers. Tell your leaders of people and senior managers, they don't have to, or senior partners or anyone, they don't have to be an expert. They just have to be an amazing expert listener and create space where people could talk about it and they actually listen, not react, not defend, but listen. So number one thing, doesn't cost anything, doesn't need a budget number, doesn't need a billable hours, just listen. Second thing is have the senior folks in your organizations, government, law firm, otherwise, I saw in the chat room, it doesn't matter what organization it is that senior leaders could set the tone of expected behavior. You work here, here are the behaviors we expect from you. Rather you believe it, practice it at home, I don't care. You work here, here's the expected behavior of inclusiveness. Third thing I will just end with, you know what I would love to see? I want to see someone get fired at an organization because they're not doing diversity, equity, inclusion well. That will send a signal and a ripple effect. If people actually believe that this is accountability and this is important, and this is one of the many company goals, and this is on the partners' performance goals, I would love to see someone fired because they're not doing diversity, equity, inclusion well. So those are my three F's.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Thanks, Sue, for that. I think that, yeah, that's where the rubber meets the road, right? Because when you're in an organization and like it's harkening back to, what Michelle Cohen-May said, don't tell me, show me. You can do all the talking in the world, but show me that this is actually matters, that this is really happening. And I think that is really super powerful. When that happens, when you show people, that's when they know. They know it's real, and they know. I feel the hope coming into my body just thinking about that. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I think those are all so excellent. Great insights, and really, really good to reflect on too. So let me see. I am like very conscious of time. Okay, good. I think we're on schedule. So how about this? Let's turn to those individuals who are who are sitting here today attending, who might not have the power in their organizations to say, oh, you know what, we need a culture change, let's get a budget together. They don't have that power, right? So what can they do in their workplaces? How can they contribute to this work? I really want to get some thoughts from you. Darnisa, what do you say to that?
I was all up in the chat thread, Amy. Can you respond one more time? There's some good
you in the chat. Okay.
Can you just repeat it one more time, and I'm happy to start.
Oh yeah, no. I was talking about the issue of those of us who are here listening to all of you who don't have the power to make change in the organization because we're not at, a sufficient leadership level, for example. And what can we do as individuals in the workplace to do the work?
So there are a couple of different things, and it actually builds on Sujan's last point. And I had mentioned in the chat that I think the evolution of where we're going is actually creating KPI goals and benchmark goals. So even though I may not have the power to make my senior leaders create a strategic vision, ask them to create affinity spaces, I don't have the power to fund it. There is a set list of competencies that everyone should have, regardless of whether leadership is doing it or not. So you know how Sujan mentioned that active listening is key. If you think about it, there are really 4 key skills that an individual needs to be able to do in order to do DEI. So the first one is empathy. I know, right? A playback to social emotional work. So the first skill is not just empathy like coddling, but it's what is my ability to be empathetic in my understanding of other people's lived conditions. You see, oppression is a design, right? Inequity is a design. And a part of that design is keeping us segregated so that we are never actually proximate enough to the lived experiences of other people to be enraged about them. So how do you build empathy? You actually get proximate to perspectives that are not your own. And I want to be very thoughtful here, because some of us in that start tokenizing people. You know, we go find the friend of color, okay? I have often been this friend. Hey, Darnisa, what does it feel like to be Black? Not that, okay? So because we are excited and we're friends, and it is exhaustive, because it would be odd if I walked up to you and said, tell me what it means to be white. And do you know why that feels odd? Because we have centered white people as the normal in this ideology, in this oppression. You didn't do it, but this is what the system does. So the first one is to be empathetic. So you can get proximate by watching videos, TED Talks about racial identity development, doing work called racial identity development. This is your ability to articulate who you are racially. You don't need any authorization from leadership to do that. And you know what happens, the more you know about who you are, the more you understand your identity in relation to other people. And do you know why that's so important? Because a lot of people think equity is a backwards Robin Hood. They think equity is stealing. They think equity is lowering standards. Equity requires empathy. Like if you don't understand that different people experience different ceilings, you're never going to change anything. So that's why empathy matters. The second skill is active listening. You can build your ability to active listen by just hearing this definition, right? The average adult attention span is 20 seconds. It's 5 to 7 words. That is real. We are listening to hear ourselves in other people. Your ability to actively listen is how much can you listen and be present with someone, even if you don't see yourself in that. You know how you build that chop? You go talk to people who are not like you and you sit in it and you really listen, right? The next one is your ability to have a difficult conversation. I would highly recommend the book, We Can't Talk About That at Work, right? We can't talk about that at work. Sooty recommended that one to me. And Sooty, you know, I read it since we talked and it's we can't talk about that here? Yeah, that's what it is. So reading books about having difficult conversations. So I would highly recommend Matt Stone's work on difficult conversations. I'd recommend the book Crucial Conversations, Courageous Conversations. We Don't Talk About That at Work, and Ijeoma Uwulu, So You Want to Talk About Race. That's the 5 for me. And then the last skill is our ability to engage in humility. So humility is the ability to say, I don't know. If you don't know that the most important thing that you will ever say in your learning journey is, I don't know, I'm here to tell you that's the first step. Because if you always think you're expert, how would you be open enough to hear or listen to new things? The common denominator of this room is that we all don't know what we don't know. And there's more that we don't know than we know we don't know. Those are the four.
Ooh.
I was trying to get it all really close and tight in there, Amy.
Oh
But
my
those are the
gosh.
four
I
big
know.
skills that you don't need anybody else to, and let me say them one more time because I said them quickly: actively listen, difficult conversations, building empathy, and engaging in humility. There is nothing wrong with imperfection. Oppression has actually made us believe perfection is real. Perfect is a construct, just like race and just like gender. We are perfectly imperfect people doing perfectly imperfect work imperfectly. A little bit of Mary Poppins for us this morning.
Thank you, Darnisa. Oh my gosh. And you know, the humility piece, I mean, if there's ever a challenge for attorneys, I'm just going to say it. I mean, let's name that humility, not the strongest suit for lawyers, I don't think, you know, typically. Sue, did you want to add anything to that, the individuals?
Yes, I would love to add to that. I think the concept of self-educate has been covered and fantastic. A huge yes and to all those recommendations. I would say rather you're in positions, if you're not in positions of sort of traditional power in your organization, the other things that you can do is the following, which is recognize the fact that I am an ally and I am not a racist are no longer mean anything. At this point in our journey, I am an ally is ground zero. That's the cost of admission. I am not a racist is also ground zero. That's also the cost of admission. And if you ever read the book, you know, How to Be Anti-Racist by Dr. Kendi, he talks about that quite a bit. What we want you to be is anti-sexist, anti-genderist, anti-ableist, anti-racist. And the way to do that, of course, is one, self-educate. Two is be an effective ally. And one of the best ways to be an effective ally is to give people critical mass. Emotional, physical, critical mass. Because you know, people who are not in positions of power, do you know how they gain power? Critical mass. Imagine all, 169 of us showing up at every organization. We got mass, right? And so in your own organization, display allyship, not friendship. What that means is if I see Rosa being interrupted at a meeting, after the meeting, if I go to her, Rosa, I can't believe that happened to you. That sucked. That's friendship. Allyship is at the meeting. I say, I believe Rosa had something she wanted to say. I want to hear her. That's allyship. And then, you know, that awkward feeling when you like fester and think about things for days and months and you don't sleep and you're like, I'm finally going to say something. And you get dead silence. Whew, silence is a form of micro-invalidation, everyone. And so imagine having an ally when I finally have the courage to say something and someone actually says, oh, Sue, thank you. I would like to hear more about that. That's allyship. Give people critical, physical, emotional, critical mass. All of us can do that. All of us can do that. And by the way, you know, it's Asian Heritage Month, for example, this month. I don't want to just know what you're going to do this month. I want to know what you're going to do on June 1st. You know, allyship is year round. If you only celebrate my culture, my heritage during Heritage Month, that's like coming to my birthday party just for the cake. You know, please, what are you going to do? We somehow caused ourselves Black History Month, February, you know, Pride, June, Asian Heritage Month, May, year round. Don't let us only compartmentize into 1 month at a time, year round. True allies stay after the celebrations and the headlines are gone.
I mean, if I can add just one thing, because it's just so powerful, Sue, thank you so much. I do believe that there's no excuse now. You're either an anti-racist or you are racist. There is no in between anymore. It's binary, it's not longer non-binary. And like Dr. Darnisa said, you have to start, it starts with you. The work starts with you. And something important about doing the work is that you need to understand your privilege. What privilege do you have? How can you use your power, your privilege at work, whatever that is, to advance those that don't have and don't enjoy the privilege that you do? Is that, are you an attorney that comes from a wealthy family? Can you mentor and support someone that might be a first generation? For example, myself as a white passing Latina, right? I have a privilege that I might look lighter than other people, right? And the way that I show up and the way that, you know, people perceive me might be in a more positive light than others that might be darkest from a different country or darker skin than mine. So learn where you sit, use that privilege and help lift others with you. And again, you know, the masses is great, but really doing the work and understanding what are the things that you're doing right now that you can do better in order to be an anti-racist, right? The whole thing about I don't see color, that's like 1992. Okay, when someone tells me they don't see color, then you don't see me. You don't see who I am. You don't see me as an immigrant. You don't see me as, you know, a first generation American that had to kind of, you know, I'm not an overnight success. I had to do everything by myself to be here. When you tell me that you don't see color, then you don't see me. You don't see my story. You don't see my struggles, and you don't see what I'm doing to better the next generation and my family legacy. So stop saying that, because you do see color. We all see color. It's just about empowering those that you can, you know, using your privilege to better other people's lives in future.
Oh, so good. Thank you so much. Laura, do you have anything, any last bits to add to that?
You know, what Rosa was just saying reminded me very much of some work that Kenji Yoshino has done at NYU. For those who are familiar, like, he has this really great model, and I will not do it justice here, of allyship. And it's the different seats that we can play, right? The impacted seat, the allyship seat, the person who is playing the aggressor in any particular moment. I think that's the frame that he uses. And one of the things that was, I don't know, shouting out to me from what you were saying, Rosa, is that I think the whole issue with women's initiatives and intersectionality is that for a long time, women, white women, have seen themselves in that impacted seat that Dr. Yoshino talks about. And so they haven't seen themselves as having privilege. They haven't seen themselves as having the need to actually be the ally. And I think that's starting to shift now, that white women are seeing that dynamic, that you may be in the impacted seat when it comes to gender dynamics in the organization, but you are not in the impacted seat when it comes to women of color in the organization. And so if I have been actually not enough of an advocate, champion, and ally in the past in my own organization around intersectionality within women's initiatives. And so I say it now. I think that if, you know, all of the women in this group who have not really dug into that piece of your own identity, how you show up, it's so critical for us, because when we come together, we are so much stronger. So, you know, thank you to this whole panel. It's been such a pleasure.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much to all of you. I think you gave us such great things to think about, and really helpful. And I feel, I think it's left, you know, us with some hope, even in the midst of frustration, and even in the midst of, you know, as we were talking about how overwhelming sometimes it can feel, because as Darnisa said, you know, this is a long, she says it's a generational journey, and certainly within an organization, it's 10 years to equity. So that can feel overwhelming, but these are such great, you know, things that we can think about to help us, you know, kind of do the work, you know, bit by bit, and ultimately, you know, work toward real change that we want to see in our organizations. So thank you so much to all of you. I'm so sorry for all the great questions that everyone had. Please, Darnisa is going to be in a breakout with Sooty later on. Please check that out if you want to. And in addition, I'm sure these great panelists would be happy to answer any questions if you wanted to ping them. But thank you again, all of you. I'm so grateful that you took the time, and I know that our attendees really benefited from your presence. Thank you so much.